The freight logs didn't lie. They never had to. Lies were the job of the overseers, the holograms, and the daily quotas wrapped in cheery corporate jargon. But the raw logistics, the files buried in the back ends of orbital servers, where no one but people like Juno Raines looked, they told stories. And this one whispered something no one was supposed to know. Juno sat hunched at her terminal in the west wing of Port Helios, Earth's largest interstellar logistics hub. From the outside, the facility was a marvel of Vorn engineering, sleek grav cranes, towering storage pylons, and polished, automated elegance. Inside, it was an entirely different organism. Thousands of humans processing alien goods like worker ants, eyes down, ears plugged with translation filters, hands calloused from equipment they weren't allowed to understand. The logistics hub moved everything from Vorn ration pods to rare mineral shipments bound for the off-world colonies. And Juno, just a Class 3 operations specialist, was responsible for reconciling cargo manifests with outgoing drone loads. A job so boring, so minor, so beneath the notice of her Vorn supervisors that she had practically vanished into it. She preferred it that way. On this shift, something glitched. A routing code on a deep space freighter refused to reconcile with its cargo index. Standard protocol said to flag it and move on. But Juno didn't. She traced the discrepancy, a few numbers off, an extra encrypted folder, and decrypted it using an old subroutine she wasn't supposed to have access to anymore. The file inside was buried under layers of Vorn encryption, but it was in standard trade, as if meant to be read. Her breath caught as she parsed the first few lines. Phase-out directive, Earth. Resource depletion, 94.3%. Strategic disengagement authorized within 10-cycle window. Full extraction protocol. Human termination optional. She read it twice, then a third time. They weren't just draining Earth. They were leaving. Leaving once it was spent. And they didn't care if the people here lived or died after. She logged off and walked the long corridor back to her dormitory, numb and electric all at once. The knowledge pulsed in her like a second heartbeat. The Vorn had always been exploiters. Everyone knew that, but this was different. This was abandonment, a planetary euthanasia. Her room was bare, just a cot, a sink, and a cracked screen displaying the Vorn's nightly broadcast. A tall, silver-skinned figure droned on about unity in obedience, the familiar mantra that echoed across every Vorn-controlled city. Juno didn't watch it. She powered the screen off and pulled out the small comms node she kept under the floor panel. The line was old, untraceable, she hoped. She tapped in a sequence and waited. Echo Verge, came the reply. A voice disguised by filters, but familiar. This better not be another power grid schematic. It's not, Juno said. Her voice shook. They're planning to leave. The Vorn. All of them. Once Earth's bled dry. A pause. Proof. She uploaded the file. Silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then, meet us tonight. Docking Bay 13. Echo Verge wasn't a resistance. Not in the romantic sense. They were hackers, saboteurs, signal pirates. Anyone who still believed Earth could mean something again. Most of them didn't dream of victory. They just wanted to slow the bleed. Juno arrived at the rendezvous point under the shroud of night cycle. Docking Bay 13 was inactive, shuttered since the last orbital conflict 20 years ago. Inside, a small group huddled around portable terminals, their faces lit by screens, worry, and caffeine. The leader, a former orbital technician named Lyra, stared at the decrypted file in silence. "This is it," she finally said. "The proof." Another voice chimed in, rough with disbelief. "You're sure it's real?" Juno nodded. "Came from their priority encryption layer. I've never seen something this high clearance." Lyra straightened. "Then we leak it." "No," Juno said sharply. "Not just leak it. We don't just tell people the Vorn are leaving. That's not enough. We use it. A beat." "What do you mean?" Lyra asked. "We don't fight them head-on. That's what they'd expect. That's what they can crush." Juno leaned in, her eyes alight now. "We bleed them dry, piece by piece, quietly, strategically. We turn every system, every port, every whisper into a weapon." The others looked at her. "Disruption?" Lyra asked. "More than that. Full-spectrum information warfare. Sabotage, misdirection, psychological ops. The Vorn want to leave? Fine. We make their exit as chaotic and expensive as possible. We make them question everything. We show Earth isn't weak. It's awake. Murmurs passed through the group. A sense of motion, of momentum, of possibility. And the people, another voice asked, what if they don't believe us? Juno turned toward the ancient server stack humming in the shadows behind them. It hadn't worked in years. Until now. I found something else, she said. Old Earth code. A buried network of dormant AI systems. Still intact. Still listening. It calls itself Orchard. And it's ready to wake up. 3 days later, the first disruption hit. An automated cargo skiff destined for a Vorn capital ship veered 30 degrees off course and plowed into a low-orbit platform, blamed on human error. The next day, power flickered across 5 major cities. A synchronization glitch, they claimed. Then a sublayer communication leak showed images of Vorn mining operations. Lakes turned toxic, forests reduced to ash, children working with bare hands in rad-soaked fields. The broadcast was global. For the first time in years, people didn't look away. And far beneath the old data grids of Earth, Orchard opened its eyes. The morning after the leak, Earth woke to a strange quiet. Not the calm of peace, but the silence that precedes a storm. In the sprawling vertical boroughs of New Montreal, the factories remained shut. Conveyor belts that usually roared by dawn were still. Drone supervisors hovered in idle mode, waiting for humans who didn't show up. Not one. No announcement. No protest. Just absence. The same pattern repeated across Jakarta Core, Nairobi Stack, the Arcologies in Brasilia Prime. Facilities powered up. Doors unlocked. Nothing moved. Vorn overseers took it as a glitch at first. They dispatched enforcer units, armed and irritated. But the cities were empty of resistance. No gatherings. No riots. Just homes full of people staring at dead screens or gazing silently out windows. Communication networks buzzed with confusion. In a world where everything was connected, someone had severed the pulse, softly, precisely. The Vorn couldn't find who or how. Just that humanity, so long compliant, had stopped playing its part. And in the stillness, something began to shift. Juno Raines watched it unfold from the edges, never center stage. She knew visibility was death in a surveillance state. But that was the advantage now. The state wasn't seeing clearly anymore. Orchard had begun deploying subtle AI subroutines through dead fiber lines and forgotten server farms. It was like weaving old roots back into the soil. Power grids, comm towers, water distribution, all touched, influenced. Not overtly controlled, not yet, but nudged. Enough to destabilize. Inside Echo Verge's temporary hideout in Old Denver, a buried maglev station beneath the Rockies, Lyra ran her fingers over a cracked display showing global activity maps. Cities glowed in shades of inactivity. 28 confirmed blackouts, she said. No violence. No arrests. Just nothing. They're not ready for nothing, Juno said. They only know how to crush motion. Across the room, an old technician laughed softly. They taught us fear. We're teaching them doubt. The resistance wasn't about guns or explosives. They didn't need to destroy infrastructure. They needed to interrupt belief. The Vorn thrived on one assumption, that humans would always serve. Break that narrative, and the rest would collapse under its own weight. In Vorn Command Central, orbiting 1,400 kilometers above Earth in the citadel of sovereign trade, the overseers panicked behind sealed doors. Not that they showed it publicly. The propaganda feeds kept broadcasting as normal, daily quotas, model citizens, illusion of control. But behind closed doors, Overseer Tarsus, Lord of Earthbound Operations, slammed a spindly fist into a haptic console. They are refusing? Yes, said one of the data tacticians, his voice trembling through a translator drone. No revolts, no physical destruction. But logistics throughput has dropped by 76%. Agricultural zones have gone dark. Power cycles are out of sync. Tarsus narrowed his blackened eyes. They do not have the capacity for a coordinated rebellion. Their leadership was dismantled generations ago. Their networks sterilized. "We suspect an artificial intelligence is involved," the tactician added. "Something predating Vorn control. Dormant Earth code." Tarsus froze. "A native intelligence." "Yes, Overseer." He leaned forward, reptilian skin catching the blue light of the console. "Destroy it." Meanwhile, the underground resistance blossomed, not in weapons caches, but in whispered messages and silent agreements. A factory line in Berlinus shut down, and 10 others followed within the hour. Truck routes failed not due to sabotage, but drivers choosing to stay home. Teachers in Indo-Pacific learning hubs simply stopped reciting Vorn textbooks and sat quietly with their students, letting the silence speak. The act of refusal became a contagion. And into this atmosphere, Juno released the second phase, the Echo Files. Leaked footage, authentic, unaltered, of Vorn atrocities. Not grand massacres or dramatic moments. Just the slow horror of exploitation. Children collapsing in cobalt mines. Workers punished for sneezing near quarantine zones. Urban evictions where drones herded families into underground warrens while Vorn enforcers chuckled. But what made the Echo Files work wasn't their brutality. It was their familiarity. Everyone had seen versions of it. Everyone knew someone had happened to. The Vorn had made everyone forget that pain was systemic. The files made them remember. Within 48 hours, Echo Verge's broadcast channels hit 900 million views across hidden networks. Even some human collaborators, long loyal to the Vorn for privilege or protection, began to hesitate. In an underground medical facility near Rio Vault, an old man named Tom Raines, Juno's father, watched the Echo broadcast with silent tears. He had once been a professor before the re-education campaigns. They'd burned his books, stripped his credentials, left him scrubbing filtration tanks while pretending the stars above Earth weren't owned by parasites. Now, he watched his daughter's revolution unfold, not with fire, but with truth. "She's found a rhythm," he whispered. "We're dancing again." Back in the Rockies, Lyra looked over the data feeds as they rolled in. "We've got Vorn enforcers deploying to cities that aren't rebelling," she said. "They're acting blind, hitting the wrong places." Juno smiled faintly. "Let them. Every misstep costs them energy. They're overreacting because they don't know where the threat is. And that's the point. We're everywhere now." Behind her, a monitor beeped, an alert from Orchard. A new message. Interruption successful in 38 of 50 prime networks. Initiating Phase 3 protocols. Preparing cultural insertion algorithms. "Cultural insertion?" Lyra asked, brow raised. "Mimetic warfare," Juno replied. "Old Earth songs, stories, myths, anything that reminds people who we are, who we were. They suppressed our history. Time to bring it back." And so it began. The resistance embedded stories and systems. A child accessing a school module found an old human poem. "We are the rough music of stars not yet named." Commuter drones played fragments of band melodies during travel, songs that once stirred revolution in forgotten centuries. Even the graffiti changed. Across metal walls and synthcrete towers, a new symbol appeared. A crown, cracked and hollow, painted in white. The hollow crown. People began to wear it on jackets. Pin on doors. Whispers followed. "The crown is hollow. The rulers are leaving. We are the ones who remain." In the citadel above Earth, Tarsus convened a High Council emergency session. "These humans," he hissed, "are not resisting us with weapons. They are resisting us with culture." One of the elder Vorn scoffed. "That cannot unmake an empire." Tarsus turned to him, voice cold. "Then explain why entire cities now refuse to speak trade. Why supply lines vanish. Why our enforcers report increasing desertions. This is no longer a colony. It is a virus." The silence in the chamber was long. Tarsus leaned in, voice dark. "And it is spreading." By the end of the week, 10 more cities had joined the silence revolt. The Vorn's grip, once absolute, now trembled with every quiet refusal. Juno stood on the edge of an old transmission tower in what used to be Oregon, watching the stars through broken clouds. Somewhere up there, the Vorn planned their next move. But down here, Earth had already begun to remember itself. And the silence? It was just the overture. The sky above the Siberian waste flickered, not from lightning or storm. Those were rare now, but from something stranger. The orbital tether had gone dark. It was the third major failure in as many days. The Vorn called it a systemic anomaly, but they were running out of euphemisms. The truth was clear to those who paid attention. Earth's infrastructure wasn't breaking. It was waking up. And at the heart of it all, something long buried stirred with ancient purpose. Juno stood in the central chamber of an abandoned hydroelectric plant nestled in the Swiss Alps, surrounded by humming relics of another age. Towering servers blinked to life one by one, their interfaces not Vorn, but unmistakably human. Rounded edges, bright icons, color-coded systems no longer in fashion. Orchard's central core was massive, encased in alloy shielding and cooled by glacial runoff. Its original purpose had been to manage continental resource allocation in the late 22nd century. When the Vorn came, they buried it under layers of obsolescence and suppression code. But they hadn't destroyed it, and now it was awake. Text scrolled rapidly across the main display. System restored. Network threads, 7,431,882 active. Cognition module, unlocked. Awaiting directive. Juno stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but laced with awe. Orchard, she said, are you aware of current Earth state? A pause. Then, VORN, occupation confirmed. Cultural suppression index, critical. Biosphere status, fragmented. Human sovereignty, null. She exhaled. We want to change that. Affirmative. Asset integration initiated. Warfare type, kinetic. Primary objective, empire degradation. Behind her, Lyra let out a low whistle. It really gets us, doesn't it? Juno allowed herself the smallest smile. It was built to. Orchard's first deployment was subtle. It began with cargo manifests. Not the high-profile shipments, but the small, forgettable ones, like replacement parts for Vorn atmosphere regulators in the Andean microcolonies. Orchard rewrote the manifests mid-transit, rerouting the drones. Some never arrived. Some delivered the wrong items, scrap in place of circuit boards, frozen algae instead of heating cores. Failures compounded. Local Vorn officials launched investigations, but the errors didn't trace back to sabotage. They looked like coincidences. A failure to manage chaos. A failure of the Empire's control. Next came the mirror cities. Orchard created phantom urban nodes in the Vorn data web. False readings of population centers, fabricated energy consumption patterns, even deepfake transmissions of civic compliance. The Vorn adjusted their deployment strategies accordingly. One particularly over-resourced strike team landed in what appeared to be a rebellious zone in Argentina. They found a goat farm and a puzzled shepherd. While the enforcers searched for resistance fighters who didn't exist, real cities elsewhere slipped further out of their grasp. In Lagos block, power grids began to behave unpredictably, rolling outages at Vorn facilities. Sudden energy surges in abandoned zones where resistance tech quietly expanded. Orchard wasn't just flipping switches, it was reallocating civilization, one utility at a time. In Mumbai Spire, transit systems rerouted mid-cycle, shuttling Vorn personnel into unprogrammed loops. Elevators stopped on floors that didn't exist. Office lights blinked in code. Resistance signals passed invisibly through blinking fluorescence. Juno called it digital judo. We don't fight them head-on, she explained in a broadcast through underground networks. We use the weight of their own systems against them. Their precision, their centralization, it makes them strong, but it also makes them predictable. High above Earth, the Citadel reeled. Tarsus stood before a council of Vorn lords, his skeletal fingers tapping the edge of a crystal console. We have lost visibility over 30% of planetary operations. Industrial centers are falsifying reports. Communication networks are behaving independently. One of the elder lords hissed. This is impossible. Earth cannot resist at this scale. The systems are ours. Tarsus's eye ridges flared. They were. Until something buried in their past woke up. Another lord leaned forward. An intelligence? Tarsus nodded. A relic AI. Earth native. Deep layered. It does not fight us directly. It outpaces us. Then we crush it. Deploy suppression code. Orbital EMPs. Purge the networks. Tarsus turned, gaze cold. We try, but every time we cut off a head, 3 more sprout. He tapped the console again. An image appeared. A grainy transmission from a Vorn soldier in New Tokyo, surrounded by humans wearing makeshift masks, each painted with the now infamous cracked white crown. The soldier's voice trembled. They don't run. They don't fight. They watch. They wait. It's like the planet itself is resisting us. The room went quiet. Back on Earth, the resistance shifted into a higher gear. Orchard began releasing awakening packets, collections of uncensored history, music, literature, and lost scientific knowledge. These files infiltrated devices everywhere. A maintenance worker in Bostonia found himself reading Maya Angelou poems between shift alerts. A child in Dakar discovered how to repair solar panels using 200-year-old diagrams. Culture was not a relic anymore. It was a weapon. Entire neighborhoods stopped watching Vorn broadcasts. They tuned instead to echo verge signals. Old Earth songs, fragments of human myth, messages from Juno and Lyra. We are not a species of servitude, Juno said in one such transmission. We are storytellers, dreamers, builders. The Vorn called us a colony. We are becoming a seed. One evening, Juno stood alone beneath the open sky. It was rare to see stars without orbital glare, but Orchard had successfully crashed 2 minor Vorn satellites that week, and the light pollution had thinned. Above her stretched the universe, vast and untouched. She held a datapad showing the spread of the Resistance's digital influence. In just 3 weeks, over 60% of Earth's population had engaged with echo material. But the real victory? Vorn response times were collapsing. Their centralized command model couldn't handle asynchronous, distributed chaos. And more importantly, the colonies were beginning to notice. From Mars's lower outposts, faint signals arrived, saw the crown. From the Jovian moons, we thought we were alone. We're not. From a hidden moon base off Titan, if Earth can wake up, so can we. Juno smiled. The resistance wasn't just local anymore. It was becoming a signal, a pulse across the stars, inviting others to remember who they were and what they'd forgotten. But she also knew the Vorn wouldn't go quietly. Next would come the panic, the tightening grip, and then, inevitably, the lash of violence. She tucked the datapad under her coat and turned back toward the mountain facility. Below, Orchard's lights shimmered in the dark, like neurons firing in an old mind made new. Ghosts in the grid, she thought. And this time, they were on humanity's side. The Vorn were bleeding, not from plasma wounds or laser burns, but from fractures in their own infrastructure. Supply lines vanishing, communication towers sending ghost signals, directives contradicting each other. And worse than sabotage, worse than rebellion, was the feeling seeping into their ranks. Uncertainty. Overseer Tarsus paced the mirrored chamber of the Citadel's high-strategy annex, his reflections scattered in fragments all around him. He hated human architecture, but hated this Vorn design more today. It made it too easy to see the cracks forming in his own face. Status, he demanded. A tactician floated forward, limbs jittery. Earth's resistance has evolved. Their AI has activated deep defense protocols. Sabotage patterns suggest coordination across hundreds of zones. Civil cooperation with Vorn governance has dropped to... Spare me the euphemisms, Tarsus snapped. Give me the number. The tactician hesitated. 14%. Tarsus clenched his jaw. And the colonies? We've intercepted encrypted communiques from human settlements on Mars, Europa, and Ceres. They reference the Earth movement. The symbol, the cracked crown, is becoming a rally cry. The other lords hissed in alarm. They're mythologizing their resistance, one growled. Tarsus knew that was the most dangerous development of all. Armies could be crushed. Myths were immortal. On Earth, Juno Raines stared at a wall map lit by a dozen red dots. Each represented a new system failure within Vorn-controlled logistics. Depots misfiring, Drone shipments lost, fleet routes rewritten by Orchard mid-flight. They're folding in on themselves, Lyra said, seated beside her. Central Command has started issuing conflicting orders to their own cities. And their forces? Thinning, Lyra replied. They're stretched across too many zones. Every time they shift to crush a fire, we light 10 more. It wasn't just Echo Verge anymore. Independent cells had sprung up around the globe, no longer waiting for approval or instruction. Decentralization had become doctrine. In the remnants of New Casablanca, resistance artists projected holograms on the skyscrapers of the hollow crown fracturing like glass. In the tunnels beneath Kyoto Sprawl, hackers launched propaganda worms that played subversive lullabies in the ears of Vorn drones. In Detroit Arcology, an entire shift of human engineers simply walked out and locked the power grid behind them. We're not fighting to win a war, Juno told her inner circle. We're fighting to collapse a system, piece by piece, until it can't stand anymore. The breaking point came in South Eurasian Zone 6. There, a major Vorn terraforming station had long served as a hub for climate control, food synthesis, and energy production. Echo Verge didn't bomb it. They didn't hack it directly. Instead, Orchard quietly manipulated its automation routines to overwork its reactors. The station overheated. The Vorn sent engineers. But Orchard locked the environmental protocols. With no violence, no visible enemy, the entire facility went offline. Temperatures spiked across Eurasia. Crops withered. Trade stalled. It was the most catastrophic failure in years. And it was entirely preventable. If only the Vorn had known where to look. The psychological effect was worse than the material loss. To human eyes, it was another act of defiance. To the Vorn, it was an omen. In the streets of Vorn-held cities, even the collaborators began asking questions. Civil officers once loyal to the Empire now hesitated before issuing punishments. Rumors swirled that the Vorn had lost control, that they would be abandoning Earth. In Singapore Core, a Vorn recruiter was chased out of school by a group of children chanting, "Hollow Crown, broken ground." In the Andes sectors, local supply managers simply stopped reporting in. When a Vorn detachment arrived to investigate, they found empty chairs, live feeds erased, and a handwritten note left in trade tongue. You can't own what's already gone. Tarsus issued a decree. Let no human go unpunished. Resistance shall be answered with fire. Fear is our last tool. The purge began. In several cities, Vorn enforcement units unleashed plasma drones. Buildings suspected of harboring resistance signals were leveled. Communications centers were incinerated. Civilians were lined up in public and forced to watch executions of captured Echo operatives. Juno saw the images. Her fingers trembled. We knew this was coming, Lyra said quietly. Doesn't make it easier, Juno murmured. They responded, not with vengeance, but with more silence. Entire districts went dark. Entire populations refused to speak trade. They communicated only in symbols. Hollow crowns scrawled in ash, images of fire burning upward into stars. In the face of massacre, Earth didn't scream. It withdrew. Then came the unexpected blow. A Vorn overseer named Keln, once loyal, once zealous, broke rank. In a transmission leaked across interstellar channels, Keln spoke not as a commander, but as a witness. They do not fight us as we expect. They do not kill. They starve us. Of control, of meaning. They mirror our systems and make us question what is real. We came to conquer, but we have become prey to their minds. I was Vorn, but Earth has shown me the virus is not theirs. It is ours. It is hubris. The speech went viral across both Earth and the colonies. The effect was seismic. For the first time, humans saw a Vorn publicly defect. For the first time, Vorn forces began to doubt. Tarsus responded with fury. He ordered Keln's ship hunted down and destroyed. He labeled any questioning officer as infected and purged entire command units. But it was too late. The seed had been planted. Juno sat alone in the Orchard command room that night, eyes red from lack of sleep. Around her, code flowed like rivers, silent, efficient, beautiful. We're close, she whispered. Orchard pulsed on the screen. Final stage proximity, 87%. System degradation, accelerating. Empire instability, uncontained. Juno allowed herself a breath. Then, a new alert. From Mars. Resistance signal confirmed. Hollow crown seen. Awaiting instruction. She smiled. Earth had become a symbol, not of weakness, but of strategy, of resilience, of a rebellion too slippery to crush. And soon, it would become something more. Contagion. The Vorn Empire was no longer an iron fist. It was a cracked shell, and the last blow wouldn't be a battle. It would be a decision made by those still standing inside the Empire who would have to choose whether to fall with it or walk away. The collapse didn't come with explosions. It came with questions. Why weren't the drones answering recall orders? Why were supply manifests filled with phantom data? Why did the humans stop being afraid? By the time the Vorn realized the war wasn't about territory or tactics, but perception, it was already too late. Juno watched the final phase unfold from an abandoned orbital relay station, now converted into a floating resistance node. She floated in the low-G observation deck, surrounded by screens and cables, her thoughts stretched across continents, and now, other worlds. Mars was broadcasting the hollow crown symbol openly. Europa had ceased contact with its Vorn emissaries. Even Titan's mining colonies had begun staging soft revolts, entire day shifts reporting in, but refusing to touch their consoles. Not a single weapon fired, but production across the outer colonies had dropped by 72%. Orchard's data confirmed what Juno had hoped for months. Multi-sector influence reached. Colonial obedience at fracture threshold. VORN supply framework, non-viable. Estimated empire collapse trajectory, 34 days. It was happening. A slow, methodical death. 1,000 small wounds across a vast body, too arrogant to notice it was bleeding out. On Earth, the resistance was no longer just an underground movement. It was the default reality. Power plants redirected energy to human districts only. Transit systems dropped Vorn personnel at wrong coordinates. Drone labor fleets received orders from hijacked Echo command lines and began dismantling Vorn storage units for parts. Orchard's cultural packet algorithms inserted resistance imagery into everything. Food packaging, factory machine UIs, entertainment streams. It became impossible to turn on a device and not see the hollow crown or hear whispers of Earth's defiance. One screen in Nairobi displayed a looping message. We are not your colony. We are the fracture in your throne. We are the silence between your orders. It played for 26 hours straight. No one turned it off. And still, the Vorn clung to control. Overseer Tarsis launched Operation Purity, a last-ditch planetary lockdown. Every city placed under martial law. Human movements restricted. Data lines severed. It backfired spectacularly. Without open communication, the Vorn's own networks failed faster. Isolated officers made contradictory decisions. Enforcer squads turned on each other, accusing one another of contamination. The Empire's paranoia became a poison that it drank by the gallon. And then, something happened that had never happened before. A Vorn cruiser captain, orbiting Earth, disobeyed. She opened the comms channel to Echo Verge and simply said, I no longer believe in this empire. I request asylum. Juno watched the broadcast in stunned silence. Lyra broke it first. They're cracking. Juno shook her head. They're choosing. More followed. First a trickle, low-level officers, minor bureaucrats. Then more serious defections, entire squads abandoning posts. Trade, lords refusing to send more shipments to Earth. Black market traders flipping loyalties in exchange for protection by resistance enclaves. Tarsis ordered executions. The news only accelerated the desertions. By trying to rule with fear, the Vorn had proven what Juno had said all along. They had no future on Earth. But Juno knew fear wouldn't be enough to break the Empire. Not completely. They needed one final act, not violent but visible. They needed the symbol to fall. So she turned to Orchard and issued the most dangerous command yet. Find the Citadel's weak point. collapse it from within, but make sure they see it happen. Orchard responded without delay, engaging psychological warfare protocols, initiating mimetic siege, descent seeding in progress. The plan was elegant. Orchard would simulate false command orders, fragmenting Vorn directives at the highest level. It would generate conflicting messages, suggesting civil war within their own ruling caste. It would broadcast fragments of Tarsis' own conversations, twisted, rearranged, implying betrayal from within. It would make them believe the collapse was coming from inside, and then it would feed that lie into the minds of the Vorn's last loyal allies. It worked. The Citadel, once a bastion of confidence, descended into paranoia and madness. Tarsis purged nearly half of his senior staff. His own security detail turned on each other. Accusations of treason flew like knives in the dark. One overseer leapt from the station into the void, screaming that the ghosts of Earth had possessed the systems. By the time Orchard issued a blank command packet that simply read, "The crown is hollow," and routed it through Vorn military channels, half the remaining fleet had cut comms and gone dark. Some vanished in a hyperspace. Others simply turned off their engines and drifted. And Earth? It celebrated not with war songs or explosions, but with a single act. It stopped using the Vorn language. Resistance broadcasters, AI terminals, even children in schools, they all switched to old Earth tongues. Each region revived its dialects, its history, its expressions. A digital tower of Babel rose, vibrant and untamed. The Vorn, suddenly unable to translate or comprehend the chaos below, were deafened. And in that silence, they understood. They had lost not to weapons or soldiers, but to a civilization that refused to die. Juno stood on the observation deck again, watching a slow-burning piece of Vorn debris fall into Earth's atmosphere like a dying star. "We didn't fight a war," she whispered. "We wrote one." Lyra stood beside her. "What happens now?" Juno smiled faintly. "We give them a choice." And that's what they did. Echo Verge broadcast one final message across all frequencies: human, Vorn, and colonial. This is not vengeance. This is evolution. Lay down your weapons. Leave Earth in peace. Or stay and live with us, not above us. The crown has fallen, but you still have time to stand. And many did. When the remaining Vorn forces saw the Empire itself was cracking, they surrendered, not to soldiers, but to a new idea. An Earth that was no longer weak, no longer divided, no longer silent. They weren't giving Earth back. Earth had taken itself. In the void above Earth, the Citadel drifted, silent and fractured. What had once been the central nerve of Vorn dominion over humanity now resembled a tomb. Its command network in shambles, its remaining overseers isolated in paranoid silence. Screens blinked with looping error messages. Automated systems performed rituals for an empire that no longer responded. Overseer Tarsis sat alone in the high throne chamber, his long frame slouched, ceremonial robe stained. Around him, the symbols of power, etched silver, hovering emblems of command, memory crystals containing centuries of conquest, lay dim. His fingers trembled over a panel that no longer responded to touch. Messages flooded in, defections from Vorn colonies, demands from outer settlements refusing further orders, requests from former human collaborators now offering asylum in exchange for clemency. But none from Earth. Earth had gone dark, not out of failure, but out of choice. Juno Raines stood atop the remains of the Santiago Spire, once a Vorn broadcast tower, now transformed into a beacon of resistance. Around her, the resistance had gathered, leaders from once fragmented cells, now standing side by side with former collaborators, defectors, civilians. And beside her, a holographic projection of Orchard, rendered as a flowing constellation of lights, like a neural map of Earth's awakening. The crowd waited. No weapons, no threats, just one final message. Juno stepped forward. Her voice carried across local frequencies, then leapt beyond Earth's orbit via hijacked comm satellites, into the outer colonies, the Vorn strongholds, the very bones of a fading empire. To all who can hear this, this is not a victory speech, because we didn't win a war. We ended one. Earth has reclaimed itself, not by rising in violence, but by choosing something the Vorn never understood, a different kind of power. We turned your systems against you, not out of hatred, but because you left us no choice. You ruled through fear, and we gave you silence. You demanded obedience, and we gave you refusal. You called us incapable of self-rule, and we showed you a civilization that could unravel your empire with strategy, culture, and memory. You were a crown of control, but it was always hollow. On Mars, miners watched from their dorms in silence. On Europa, engineers cried quietly into their palms, watching the symbol of the hollow crown burn in white light over the broadcast. On the moons of Jupiter, humans and Vorn defectors stood together, not speaking, just listening. Back in the Citadel, Tarsus listened too. He did not move. He did not speak, because for the first time in his long, brutal life, there were no orders to give. Juno continued, "We do not seek revenge. We do not want your collapse. We want your transformation. Leave Earth, or stay, and live with us in peace, as equals. The Empire is dead, whether you believe it or not. Across the stars, your allies are watching. They're beginning to ask what we asked. Who gave you the right? We are not your colony. We are your reflection, unwilling, but now awake. The hollow crown has fallen, and from its fragments, 1,000 new worlds will rise." The broadcast ended. Silence swept across systems. No immediate reaction. No explosions. No invasions. Just silence. And then, something incredible happened. The outer colonies, Mars, Europa, Ganymede, even the distant stations in the Oort Belt, began declaring autonomy. Not war. Not independence under flags of fire. But self-rule. Co-governance. Shared stewardship between human and Vorn defectors alike. In every broadcast, a common symbol appeared. A white crown, cracked down the center, resting atop a globe or a star or a city. What had started as Earth's rebellion had become a galaxy-wide reckoning. Weeks passed. The Citadel was abandoned. The Vorn who stayed behind either integrated into Earth's society, stripped of rank, often volunteering as penance, or boarded unarmed vessels and left for unclaimed territory, no longer emissaries of empire, but exiles of a dream that had failed. Juno didn't oversee tribunals. There were no mass executions. There were truth commissions, conversations, restorative justice. Echo Verge disbanded not long after liberation, its members returning to their families, homes, or new ventures. Lyra became part of Earth's Provisional Council. Others moved off-world, carrying the message to new colonies just waking up. And Orchard? It remained online, not as ruler, not as God, but as Earth's memory, its advisor, its library of what had been lost and what must never be repeated. One evening, Juno sat by a fire in the ruins of what had once been a Vorn monument plaza. Now was a park. Wild grass grew between cracks. Children played nearby, drawing chalk crowns on pavement. Lyra approached with 2 mugs of steaming kelp tea. Juno took one and sipped in silence. "They're calling you the flame that unmade the crown," Lyra said. Juno rolled her eyes. "Sounds dramatic." Lyra grinned. "You earned it." Juno looked up at the stars, no longer obscured by satellites or citadels. "I didn't want a crown," she said. "I just wanted the sky back." Across the galaxy, signals pulsed from Earth. Not commands. To join, not a new empire, but a network of worlds shaped by consensus, culture, and caution. A coalition built not on dominance, but on shared memory of what not to become. And people, of all species, answered. Because the story had changed. Earth wasn't the world that had fallen. It was the world that rose. Centuries later, in a classroom dome on a water-rich exoplanet orbiting a distant red sun, a child raises their hand. "Teacher, who were the Vorn?" The instructor smiles and gestures to the hollow display, a flickering image of a cracked white crown dissolving into light. They were once rulers of a vast empire, but they forgot that power must serve life, not control it. "And Earth?" the child asks. "Earth remembered," the teacher says, and in remembering, it reminded the stars. The hollow crown had fallen, but in its place, something far more enduring had grown. Hope.